New Year's Day, 1993. A week since the children disappeared. The Miller house had become a shrine. Neighbors had left flowers, teddy bears, candles, and handmade cards on the front lawn. Vigils were held nightly, people gathering to pray, to sing, to try to make sense of the senseless. But inside the police station and FBI command center, the mood was grim. A week was an eternity in an abduction case. The first 48 hours were critical. After that, statistics became your enemy, and they were well past 48 hours. Still, the search continued. It had expanded to encompass a 50-mile radius. Helicopters equipped with thermal imaging cameras flew grid patterns over forests and fields, looking for any heat signatures that might indicate hidden children. Ground teams used cadaver dogs now, alongside the tracking dogs. No one wanted to say it out loud, but they had to consider all possibilities. Volunteers numbered in the thousands. People drove from neighboring states to help search. Off-duty police officers from Columbus, Cleveland, Pittsburgh. Retired FBI agents. Search and rescue teams. They combed through every inch of terrain, checked every abandoned building, every barn, every hunting cabin within the search radius. In the town square, a command center had been set up with maps covering entire walls. Red pins marked places already searched. Yellow pins marked places to investigate. Blue pins marked reported sightings that turned out to be false. The map was a sea of color, but the children remained missing. Margaret had stopped eating. She'd lost 8 pounds in a week. Her eyes had dark circles so deep they looked like bruises. She sat in Emily's bedroom most days, holding her daughter's clothes, crying until there were no more tears left. David had thrown himself into the search, going out every day with volunteer groups, walking until his feet blistered, calling his children's names until his voice gave out. The FBI had brought in a profiler, Dr. Raymond Adler, a man who'd worked on some of the most disturbing cases in the Bureau's history. He spent days reviewing every piece of evidence, every witness statement, trying to build a psychological picture of who might have taken the children. His preliminary profile was chilling. The perpetrator was likely male, between 30 and 50 years old. Organized and methodical, possibly with a military or law enforcement background, given the precision of the abduction. Someone who'd been watching the family, learning their routines. The crime required planning, surveillance, and the ability to control multiple children simultaneously, which suggested either exceptional confidence or prior experience. The note left at the church indicated a need for control and a desire to communicate. This person wanted the family and authorities to know that they were in charge, that they'd accomplished something remarkable. It was a form of ego gratification. Most disturbing, Dr. Adler suggested the children might have been taken for one of 3 reasons: trafficking, personal obsession, or what he called collection. The latter was rare but not unheard of. Individuals who abducted multiple children to create a captive family of sorts, often keeping them hidden for years. The trafficking angle was investigated heavily. The FBI coordinated with international agencies, checking reports of American children spotted in other countries. They monitored known trafficking routes, checked with sources in the dark underworld of child exploitation. But there were no hits, no credible sightings. The children had vanished as completely as if they'd never existed. On January 4th, a break that felt promising but ultimately led nowhere. A witness came forward from West Virginia, nearly 300 miles from Ridgewood. Carla Henderson worked at a truck stop diner off Interstate 70. On December 26th, 2 days after the abduction, a man had come into the diner around 2 in the morning. He'd been nervous, jumpy, kept looking out the window at his vehicle. A dark van. What had caught Carla's attention was that he'd ordered 5 children's meals. 5. At 2 in the morning. She thought it was strange but hadn't questioned it. People traveling with kids sometimes stopped at odd hours. But now, seeing the news about the missing Ohio children, she wondered. The FBI descended on the truck stop, pulled security footage, interviewed every employee. The video showed the man, but the quality was poor, The angle bad. Medium height, dark hair, wearing a jacket and baseball cap that obscured his features. The van's license plate wasn't visible from the camera angle. But there was something else. The man had paid cash, counted out exact change, as if he prepared it beforehand. And when Carla had tried to make small talk, asking if his kids were sleeping in the van, he'd gotten angry, snapped at her, grabbed the food and left. The FBI analyzed every frame of footage, brought in specialists to try to enhance the images. They got a partial view of the van's make, possibly a Ford or Chevrolet from the mid-'80s. But that described thousands of vans, and the footage of the man was too grainy to make a positive identification. Still, it was something. A man traveling with food for 5 children, just 2 days after the abduction, heading west towards St. Louis and beyond. The FBI put out alerts to every truck stop, every rest area, every convenience store along Interstate 70. But the trail went cold after West Virginia. No other sightings. No additional footage. Meanwhile, the investigation into Harold Jenkins had been quietly continuing. Despite his polygraph results and lack of evidence, some officers couldn't shake the feeling that he knew something. On January 5th, they brought him in again for questioning. This time, Harold brought a lawyer, a public defender who insisted that his client had cooperated fully, had been harassed by the community, and had nothing to do with the disappearance. Unless they had evidence to charge him, he was leaving. They had no evidence. Harold left. But the damage to his life was complete. He'd been fired from his part-time job at a hardware store. His neighbors had stopped speaking to him. Someone had slashed his car tires. He was, for all practical purposes, a pariah in his own town, guilty in the court of public opinion even if the law couldn't touch him. On January 8th, something happened that changed the direction of the investigation. A child matching Emily's description was reported at a shopping mall in Indianapolis, about 90 miles from Ridgewood. A security guard had noticed her because she seemed distressed, crying, holding a woman's hand but constantly looking back over her shoulder as if wanting to escape. The mall security called Indianapolis police. By the time officers arrived, the woman and child were gone. But the mall security cameras had captured footage. Agent Pierce drove to Indianapolis immediately, her heart racing. Could this really be Emily? She reviewed the footage with mall security. A girl, approximately 12 years old, brown hair, wearing a blue winter coat. With her was a woman, maybe 40, wearing sunglasses and a headscarf, her face partially obscured. They were walking through the food court when the girl had tried to pull away. The woman had grabbed her arm, yanking her close, saying something that made the girl stop struggling. Pierce felt her stomach clench. The girl's body language screamed distress. But was it Emily? The footage wasn't clear enough to be certain. The angle was from above, and the girl never looked directly at the camera. She took the footage back to Ridgewood, showed it to Margaret and David. They watched it frame by frame, leaning close to the screen, desperate to see confirmation. It could be her, Margaret whispered. The way she walks. Emily walks like that, with her shoulders hunched. But the coat's wrong, David said, his voice breaking. Emily's coat is red. This girl's wearing blue. They could have changed her clothes, Agent Pierce said gently. That would make sense if someone was trying to keep her hidden. The FBI put out an alert for the woman, distributed still frames from the mall footage to every police department in Indiana. But the woman's face was too obscured to identify, and without a license plate or vehicle description, they had little to go on. Could the children have been taken across state lines? And if so, by whom? Days passed with no new sightings. The mall footage became another piece of a puzzle that refused to come together. Was it Emily? Or just another girl in distress, her situation unrelated to the Miller case? Without being able to find the woman or the child from the footage, they couldn't know. On January 10th, the case took another strange turn. A package arrived at the Ridgewood police station. No return address. Postmarked from Chicago. Dated January 8th. Inside was a child's drawing, done in crayon on white paper. The drawing showed 5 stick figures, 2 taller, 3 shorter, standing in front of a house. Above them, a sun with rays. Below them, grass rendered in messy green scribbles. At the bottom, in a child's handwriting, "We are okay. Don't worry." The handwriting was analyzed, compared to samples from Emily's school notebooks. The experts couldn't be certain, but there were similarities. The way she made her lowercase, the size and spacing of letters. It could be Emily's handwriting, or it could be someone imitating a child's handwriting. But if it was real, if Emily had drawn this, what was she trying to communicate? The 5 stick figures, were those the children and their captors? The house, where was it? Chicago. Somewhere else. Was this a cry for help? Or were the children truly okay as the message claimed? The package was tested for DNA, fingerprints, any trace evidence. Nothing. Whoever sent it had been careful. David looked at the drawing and broke down completely. "That's Emily's," he sobbed. "I know my daughter's handwriting. She drew this. She's alive. They are alive." But Agent Pierce had to be cautious. "It could be," she said carefully. "Or it could be someone manipulating us, giving us false hope. We can't know for certain." The drawing was released to the media. Maybe someone had seen children matching the description in Chicago. Maybe someone recognized the house in the drawing, simplistic as it was. The phones rang off the hook with tips, but again, nothing concrete emerged. The investigation seemed to be moving in circles. Clues that led to more questions. Sightings that couldn't be confirmed. Evidence that could be interpreted a dozen different ways. Meanwhile, the children remained missing, and with each passing day, the chances of finding them alive grew slimmer. By mid-January, some of the volunteers had stopped coming. People had jobs to return to, lives to resume. The national news had moved on to other stories. Ridgewood was left to grapple with its tragedy in relative quiet, the intense spotlight fading but the pain remaining as sharp as ever. Margaret started attending a support group for families of missing children. She sat in a church basement with other parents who understood the unique agony of not knowing, of living in a limbo between hope and despair, of seeing their child's face every time they closed their eyes, wondering if they were suffering, if they were scared, if they were calling out for mommy and daddy. David couldn't bring himself to go. He kept searching. Every weekend, he'd drive to neighboring towns, putting up flyers, showing pictures of his children to anyone who would look. He became a familiar sight, the desperate father, his eyes hollow and haunted, asking the same question over and over. "Have you seen these children?" The answer was always no. February 1993. 5 weeks since the children vanished. The investigation had hit a wall. Every lead had been chased down and exhausted. The FBI had conducted over 1,000 interviews. The search area had expanded to cover 3 states. But there was nothing. No bodies. No credible sightings. No arrests. Then, on February 12th, something happened. A hiker named Robert Caldwell was exploring a remote area near Shawnee State Forest, about 80 miles southeast of Ridgewood. He was following a trail that had been partially washed out by recent rains when he noticed something off the path, partially hidden by underbrush. A vehicle. It was an old camper van, dark blue with rust eating through the wheel wells. It had been driven off the trail and deliberately concealed, branches and debris piled against it. If Robert hadn't been looking for a place to rest and happened to glance in that direction, he might have walked right past it. He approached cautiously. The van's windows were dirty, impossible to see through. The sliding door on the side was closed but not locked. Robert pulled it open, and the smell hit him immediately. Not death, thank God, but the musty smell of abandonment, of things left to rot. Inside the van, Robert's flashlight beam revealed something that made his heart race. Children's items. A small pink shoe. A boy's jacket, torn and dirty. Fast food wrappers, Wendy's, McDonald's, Burger King, scattered across the floor. Empty juice boxes. A stuffed animal, a gray rabbit with one ear missing. and written on the van's interior wall in marker, Grace. Robert backed away and immediately called 911 from his cell phone. Within hours, the area was swarmed with police and FBI agents. The van was photographed, processed, and eventually transported to a forensics lab for detailed analysis. The license plates had been removed, but the VIN number led investigators to the van's last registered owner, Thomas Kewaunee, age 53, address in Dayton, Ohio. The van had been reported stolen 6 months earlier, in June 1992. Thomas Kewaunee became the immediate focus of the investigation. Officers went to his Dayton address and found a small, well-maintained house in a working-class neighborhood. Thomas answered the door, a tall man with graying hair and a neat beard. He looked confused when police identified themselves. Yes, he owned a van matching that description. It had been stolen from his driveway 6 months ago. He'd filed a police report. Did they find it? They had. Could he come down to the station to answer some questions? At the station, Thomas seemed genuinely cooperative. He explained that he'd bought the van in 1988, used it for camping and fishing trips. Last June, he'd woken up one morning and it was gone. Just vanished overnight. The police had told him it was probably teenagers joyriding, that it might turn up eventually. Had he known it was being used in an abduction case? Thomas's face went pale. What? No. God, no. Those missing children from Ridgewood. That's what this is about. They showed him photos of the van's interior, the children's items, the name written on the wall. Had he ever transported children in the van? Never, he insisted. He had no children, no grandchildren. He'd never used the van for anything except solo trips. They checked his alibi for Christmas Eve. Thomas had been at his brother's house in Dayton, celebrating with extended family. 17 people could confirm his presence. He'd stayed overnight, not returning to his own house until Christmas afternoon. The FBI processed his home anyway. Searched every room, every closet, the basement, the garage. They found nothing. No evidence that children had ever been there. No connection to the Miller family. Thomas's computer showed no searches related to the case, no suspicious content. His phone records were clean. He was either completely innocent, or he was the most meticulous criminal they'd ever encountered. The van itself told a more disturbing story. Forensics found fingerprints, lots of them, most too smudged to be useful. But they found DNA, hair strands, saliva traces on the juice boxes, skin cells. The analysis would take weeks, but if they matched the Miller children, it would prove they'd been in that van. More items were cataloged. A child's sock, a hair bow, a toy truck that looked exactly like the ones Tommy played with. But also gloves, adult gloves, extra large. Boot prints in the dirt that had accumulated on the van's floor. A road atlas with certain pages dog-eared, showing routes through Ohio, Indiana, and Illinois. Agent Pierce stood inside the van, now stored in an evidence warehouse, and tried to piece together what had happened. Someone had stolen this van 6 months before the abduction. Planned ahead. Prepared. Used it to transport the children, then abandoned it in a remote location where it might not be found for months or years. The items inside suggested the children had been alive when they were in the van. They'd eaten fast food, drunk juice boxes. But how long had they been in hay? Where did they go after the van was abandoned? The forensic team found something else. Embedded in the carpet near the back doors were small fibers, blue and red, consistent with the jacket and scarf the children had been wearing. And there was soil, analyzed to be from the Ridgewood area. The van had definitely been near the Miller house on or around Christmas Eve, but there was also soil from other locations. Multiple locations. The van had traveled extensively. DNA testing of the soil sample suggested it had been in at least 7 different counties across 3 states. This was starting to paint a picture of something organized, almost professional. Someone who stole a vehicle well in advance, used it for the crime, then disposed of it far from the abduction site. Someone who knew to remove license plates, to choose an abandoned area where the van wouldn't be quickly discovered. The investigation into Thomas Karani continued despite his alibi. They pulled records going back years, looked into his employment history, his financial records, his associates. Thomas had been a foster parent in the 1980s. They discovered he and his wife, now divorced, had taken in troubled teenagers for several years. That detail sent investigators scrambling. They tracked down every child who'd been placed in Thomas's care, interviewed them, now adults. Had he been inappropriate? Abusive? Could this be connected? But everyone they spoke to had positive memories. Thomas and his wife had been kind, patient. They provided stable homes for kids who had nothing. None of the former foster children reported anything suspicious or concerning. Still, the fact remained that Thomas knew how to care for children, knew how to manage multiple kids at once. And his van had definitely been used in the abduction. Even if he hadn't personally taken the children, he was connected somehow. On February 20th, the DNA results came back. The hair found in the van was a match for Emily Miller. The saliva on one of the juice boxes matched Lucas Miller. The skin cells on a seat cushion matched Sarah Miller. The children had absolutely been in that van, which meant whoever took them had stolen it from Thomas County months earlier, specifically for this purpose. But who? Who had access to the van? Who had been in Thomas's neighborhood, seen the van sitting in his driveway, and decided it would be perfect for their plans? Police canvassed Thomas's neighborhood. Did anyone remember seeing suspicious people around the time the van was stolen? Any unfamiliar vehicles? Anyone asking about Thomas or showing unusual interest in his property? Most people couldn't remember details from 6 months ago. But one neighbor, Edith Marshall, 81 years old and sharp as a tack, recalled something. In late May or early June, there'd been a man walking the neighborhood. She'd noticed him because he walked slowly, looking at houses, yards, vehicles. She thought maybe he was a contractor, evaluating homes for potential work. What did he look like? Medium height, medium build, nothing distinctive. He'd been wearing a hat and sunglasses, even though it was overcast that day, which she'd thought was odd. Maybe 40 or 50 years old. White. That was all she could remember. It wasn't much, but it suggested premeditation going back months. Someone had been planning this, looking for the right vehicle to steal, choosing their target carefully. The Miller family was informed about the van discovery. David and Margaret drove to the forensics warehouse, needing to see it themselves. Agent Pierce warned them it would be difficult, but they insisted. Margaret stood outside the van for a long time before she could bring herself to look inside. When she finally did, she broke down. Grace's stuffed rabbit, the one Margaret thought was lost, was there, dirty and torn, but there. Her baby had been in this van, had held that rabbit, had been scared and probably crying out for her mother. David found Tommy's toy truck and held it in his shaking hands. He remembered buying it for Tommy's birthday, remembered how Tommy's face had lit up. And now here it was, evidence in a crime scene, a silent witness to something horrible. They were here, Margaret whispered. Our babies were here. And then where did they go? Where are they now? That was the question torturing everyone. Because the van was a break in the case, proof that the abduction had happened, proof that the children had been alive at least for some time after their disappearance. But it didn't tell them where the children were now. Didn't tell them if they were still alive. Didn't give them anyone to arrest, anyone to blame, anyone to punish. The investigation seemed to be at a dead end, until a mysterious letter arrived at the police station. The envelope was postmarked from Cincinnati, dated February 18th. Inside was a single sheet of paper with a typewritten message. No signature, no identifying marks. The van is just the beginning. They took more than you know. Look for the pattern. Look for the others. December brings darkness. The message was cryptic, ominous. Who were the others? What pattern? What did December have to do with anything beyond the fact that the Miller children were taken in December? Agent Pierce remembered her research into other unsolved abduction cases. Multiple children, minimal evidence, never found. Cases going back years. All of them had occurred in winter. 3 in December, 1 in January, 1 in February. Was this letter writer saying those cases were connected? That the same person or people who took the Miller children had taken others? The FBI pulled those old case files and started comparing them in detail. Different states, different years, but similarities in method. Multiple children taken at once. Little to no physical evidence left behind. No bodies ever recovered. In Vermont, 1989, 2 siblings had vanished from a park. A dark van had been reported in the area. In Illinois, 1985, 4 children from 2 families had disappeared within an hour of each other. Witnesses had reported seeing a dark truck or van. In Oregon, 1987, 3 children had vanished from their backyard. A neighbor had reported hearing a vehicle with a loud engine. Could this really be connected? Could there be someone, or a group of someones, who'd been abducting children for years and never getting caught? The handwriting on the letter was analyzed and compared to the note left at the church. Different. The church note had been handwritten in block letters. This new letter was typewritten, but the phrasing had similarities. Short, declarative sentences. A certain formality to the language. More disturbing, when the letter was checked for fingerprints, they found a partial print on the envelope seal. It was run through every database, and it matched a print from an unsolved case in Vermont, from the park where those 2 siblings had disappeared in 1989. Whoever sent this letter had been at that park, had possibly been involved in that abduction, and now they were reaching out about the Miller children. But why? What was the point of these letters? Were they taunts? Confessions? Cries for help from someone unable to stop themselves? Psychological experts analyzed the communications. The writer wanted attention, they determined. Wanted to be recognized for what they'd accomplished. But there was also a pattern here. A need to communicate, to connect, maybe even to be caught. On some level, the FBI decided to release parts of the letter to the media, hoping it might generate tips. If there was a pattern, if other abductions were connected, maybe someone out there had information, had seen something, had noticed a suspicious person in multiple locations. The response was overwhelming. Tips flooded in from across the country. People claiming to have seen similar vehicles. People reporting suspicious individuals in their neighborhoods. Psychics offering visions. Conspiracy theorists weaving elaborate theories. But buried in the noise, there was something. A woman in Illinois, Carol Fletcher, called to report that in December 1985, the month those 4 children disappeared from her state, she'd worked at a truck stop on Interstate 55. A man had come in late one night, ordered children's food, paid cash, and left quickly, just like the West Virginia sighting. She hadn't thought anything of it at the time, but now, hearing that similar incidents had occurred in multiple cases, the FBI tracked down security footage from that truck stop if it still existed. It didn't. Too many years had passed. But Carol agreed to work with a sketch artist. She described the man as best she could remember. Medium height, medium build, dark hair, ordinary looking. The kind of person you'd forget 5 minutes after seeing them. The sketch was compared to other witness descriptions from the various cases. There were similarities, but nothing definitive. Without clear photos or video, they couldn't be certain it was the same person. Still, the pieces were starting to suggest something terrifying. A predator who'd been operating for years, moving between states, targeting families with multiple children, using stolen vehicles, planning meticulously, and somehow, despite all the investigations, despite all the resources thrown at these cases, never being caught. The question now wasn't just where were the Miller children. It was who had them, how many other children had this person taken, and how many more would disappear before they could be stopped. This isn't the end. Subscribe for part 3.